and you chose to spend an hour with Becky and I, and we're really appreciative. So you're joining our webinar, Using American Indian Legends to Teach Financial Education. And my name is Jennifer Garbo, and I'm an extension educator in the Center for Family Development at the University of Minnesota. My regional office is located in Cloquet, which is on the Fond du Lac Reservation, and I live in Duluth, Minnesota.
And I'm Becky Hagen-Jokla, and I'm a retired extension educator in family resiliency. And I'm pleased to continue teaming with Jennifer in this whole area of using American Indian legends to teach financial education. So welcome.
Okay. Becky?
Yes. Okay, so we have three main objectives for today. And the first one is to examine the use of legends or storytelling as an engaging teaching technique. And also to review the connection between decision-making from a cultural lens and financial choices. In addition, to examine the promoting of respect and understanding for culture through storytelling.
So I'm going to provide a little bit of context and histories about our lessons. So Becky and I, we've worked together for a very long time, and I'm so happy to be able to still continue to work with her on this project. Becky and I have been a part of, when she was with Extension, a cultural study group, along with a colleague of ours who also has retired, Antonia Alba Moraz. And we came together and worked on a number of different ways to think about culture in terms of decision-making and financial education. And Becky and I were fortunate enough to work on a SCIFAR grant, which is a Children, Youth, and Families grant. It was submitted, and well, actually we received the funding in 2015. It was a 5-year project, and Becky and I had actually a really small piece of the grant. And what we decided to do is to use storytelling as the framework to teach financial education to youth, and specifically tribal youth. So although as we go through our presentation, I think you'll find that the lessons that we developed are applicable beyond tribal youth. So it doesn't need to just occur with Native youth, but it can the lessons can be used with non-Native youth as well. Becky and I piloted with a group of tribal youth in a classroom at the Fond du Lac Ojibwe school. I think we had 3 different pilot sessions and listened to what the students had to say, and came back and modified and did some changes with our lessons. And I also taught for a number of summers at the White Earth Math and Science Camp using these lessons in an outdoor experiential experience for the youth. Becky and I have done state and national presentations on this work. We've asked for it to be peer reviewed, and we've revised based on the feedback we received. And then we did a final editing and publishing of the booklet, which also, I should note, is available. At the end, we'll provide a link that you're able to go and download a PDF version for yourself. So the intersection between culture and the content is financial education and decision-making, goal setting, just kind of the whole umbrella of financial capability. So Ojibwe people, which I am Ojibwe, I'm a Voice for band member, and the majority of the stories that we used are Ojibwe specific, although there are a couple that are more considered kind of a pan-Indian. So the Three Sisters story is pretty common across different tribal nations across our country. There are different versions. But to talk a little bit about Ojibwe specific and storytelling. So storytelling traditionally is a way of passing on information and wisdom. And typically it happens from elders to youth, or from elders or older members of the family to younger members of the family. And traditionally, storytelling occurred during the season when snow is still on the ground. And it's believed that the spirits are asleep during this time. So many of the stories are about spirits as helpers or teachers for the people. And it was considered bad behavior to talk about them when they're awake. So the snow, you can think of it as kind of a blanket covering the spirits, right? And as this picture illustrates, a lot of important activities happened during the colder months, the times when the families were together more often, they weren't outside as much. And so different types of activities such as mending clothes, making items to use within the household, repairing items that were used during hunting and cooking, and creating ceremonial items in addition to storytelling occurred during typically the winter, the colder months. But there are a lot of different beliefs around storytelling across Indian country, and we're our primary beginning point is with Ojibwe people. So that's how we understood this, and that's how we created these lessons. So there are a lot of cultural values that can inform money decisions. And as we dug into different stories, we really pulled out pieces that we could connect to the content of financial literacy, and we infused education with a cultural understanding. So using culture as a framework around financial capability and decision making and values, which we think is a pretty creative and exciting way to present information to youth, because we know that youth really love to be able to identify and see themselves within the stories, and that occurred. So we've had students say, my grandmother told me this story, and really get excited, and you can just see the enthusiasm and the excitement when they're able, as an Indigenous person, a Native youth, to see themselves within the stories and to see themselves within the education.
And just to highlight that, I often just so enjoy working with Jennifer to tell our story about how we created a mechanism for reaching out to youth. And we had hoped them a way to capture their interest and enthusiasm. And from our experience, that did definitely happen. And just to acknowledge our entire team too, with this book project, and Dr. Joyce Cerrito, who is an associate professor and extension specialist, and Sarah Louise Butler, our research support individual that helped so much in this whole venture, acquiring grant money to have the book and all of that. But in telling our story, we'd like to take a moment, and we don't have a poll, but decided to use a chat. If you would take a moment and just type in the chat, yes or no, if you use stories when you teach. We just wanted to get a feel for your involvement with storytelling. So if you'll take a moment and just chat, type in yes or no, and we can definitely get a feel for this. Okay, it looks like just a lot of positives. And again, storytelling is such a unique way to reach our audience. Thank you.
Oops. Trying to advance the slides here. There we go.
Okay, thank you, Jennifer. And just to note that Jennifer mentioned we have a long history of working together, over 10 plus years, and also connecting, as she mentioned, with our colleague, Antonio Alba. And in looking at how we collected different resources, this book is just to illustrate our intense interest in acquiring as many resources as possible. And I have to tell one story. Jennifer and I had the wonderful opportunity of going through the American Indian Museum in Washington, D.C. together. And it was where we had time to tour and listen into the videos that we were able to acquire and reflect in the bookstore even, and that sparked our interest, of course, in looking at our venture here. But just that we've always had a long interest of whatever anyone shared of using social, storytelling with their audiences.
So I also have to give Becky kudos. It was her idea to start looking at different books that exist and different stories and resources to create some education for youth. And I thought it was so brilliant because youth love stories, and the classroom environment can be a safe place for a lot of students who may be experiencing difficulty at home or within community. And so to create a classroom environment where storytelling can occur, and ideally what we would love at some point, and we've talked with others, is if elders could actually come into the classroom to share not only the stories that we're presenting here, but also their own stories and wisdom and knowledge. So that's something that we'll be looking to in the future, to try to create some opportunities for students to learn in that way as well. So here is the first slide of what the booklet looks like. And Booshke Giin, and it's okay if it's if you need to say it several times. It's the Ojibwe words for "it's up to you, it's your decision." So Booshke Giin. And you know, when I've worked with our Ojibwe students, you know, we should not assume that even if they attend a tribal school and live within a tribal community that they're fluent in Ojibwe. I'm not. And so I share with them that it's an opportunity for us to learn together. And so I've even created some additional activities with the students based on the Ojibwe words in each of the lessons, and we'll walk you through those as well. But to let the students know, to show my vulnerability that I'm learning too, and that we can all learn together. And so that's also been a really great additional benefit to these lessons. So Booshke Giin is a creative approach to involve American Indian youth in active learning experiences that make financial education concepts relevant to their everyday decision making. The Booshke Giin lessons attempt to push aside mainstream ways in favor of storytelling to teach core financial concepts. Unfortunately, mainstream education has failed American Indian youth for a very long time. And the classroom and the institution and the system of formal education hasn't always been very inviting to Indigenous youth. So the incorporation of using stories to grab the youth's attention immediately was something that we were really angling toward. And our hope is that you find the approach and the lessons easily adaptable for the diverse audiences you serve, or even if there aren't diverse audiences in terms of racial or ethnic diversity, that these stories also will speak to youth across all different groups. So here's an example of how each lesson is set up in the same way. And so it's pretty user friendly. And our approach combines personal finance concepts with American Indian stories. The lessons were designed based on Ojibwe legend stories to reinforce financial concepts. And we also, again, as I mentioned, incorporated some Ojibwe vocabulary and cultural information, just at the very rudimentary level. And youth are able to reflect on the story to make a meaningful personal connection between the financial concept and their own culture. The focal point of the lessons is the story. The American Indian culture is known for our rich oral tradition, and oftentimes instead of using written language to document history, many Indigenous people relied on vivid narratives about history and telling stories as a way to teach history and important social norms and cultural components and how that plays out in contemporary life. There's financial activities and games that follow each of the stories, allowing youth to dive deeper into financial concepts. We incorporate culturally inclusive stories so youth are able to participate more fully by applying the financial concepts to their lives, because as we know, the more applicable we can make education, the more likely that our audience will learn and then take that next step and put some of the pieces that they've learned into practice into their lives. Let's see. So some of the symbolic connections within the stories are things like love and leadership and honor, relationships with animals, and just to reiterate that each lesson is user friendly, and it's also really interesting. So one thing that financial education sometimes lacks in our experience is that kind of that spark, what sparks, and especially for youth, who are just kind of beginning to start to understand their place in the world and how they want to make decisions for themselves and how they can build on some of the knowledge and information they already have. So we think that using these lessons can help youth see themselves and learn some new information. So within each lesson, there's an overview. Let me go back actually. So if you look to the left-hand side, you'll see that we have the objectives, we have the estimated time for lesson, and there are also additional activities. And so if you are working with students in an after-school program or something like that, that may be longer than classroom time, you can extend the time. So flexibility was really important for us. Each lesson has an overview. Each lesson, again, has Ojibwe words, and we have our references, and we have our summary. So I don't want to get too far ahead of myself here. Let's see. Okay.
Then there's a whole section on laying the groundwork. And with that, you can see again on the left some reflections of the objectives, estimated time, very flexible, and materials needed. And just to help the instructor think of their audience and all that's needed to set the stage for that lesson and provide a brief introduction. As was mentioned, the terms are identified in reference to the stories and to then help the instructor in getting that groundwork before the actual lesson. Lesson 1 is the why the porcupine has quills, and it's a focus on then values and goals and decision making. Materials that are needed are mentioned, but in with that, I wanted to highlight that often puzzles were used, and we experimented when we taught and found them to be very successful as far as engagement of the student, and just a chance to, with the terms in the Ojibwe language, to learn and remember and recall. And as Jennifer mentioned, their recall is, they brought up if we forgot something in the story or even a review of the words in Ojibwe. They were right on in letting us know. So very helpful information that I found anyway, and in going forward and laying the groundwork for the actual lessons. Oh, and one other item that I wanted to mention is throughout there's the trickster. And Jennifer, you can help me pronounce this, but Winnebago.
Close. Yep. So it's Winnebago.
Mhm.
Winnebago.
Yes, a trickster or an individual that's woven throughout many of the legends. That's very important as a figure in the Ojibwe world, correct?
Correct. As a prominent figure throughout a lot of different stories, and Winnebago's role primarily is to teach the people. So, we understand that sometimes when we're taught lessons, um, it might be not in the ways that we the easy way, right? So the hard lessons and the lessons that the people needed to understand for survival, and also to understand in terms of their roles and responsibilities to one another, and to the world. Winnebago was there to guide and help the people. So Winnebago is a prominent figure throughout a lot of Ojibwe stories. Yeah.
Right. And it's kind of fun what the more you read and you can pick out the messages that's there, termed often as a hero. And one last point to mention, you'll notice in the far right-hand corner of that page, tips. There are different tips that are provided to assist the instructor. And one tip we found helpful is, instead of the instructor reading the story, sometimes the students, if they were willing, were very much interested in sharing the story, even reading. Okay.
Thank you. So here's an example of the beautiful artwork that we've incorporated throughout the booklet. And this one is the porcupine. So this one depicts our first story, or our first lesson within the booklet. And we primarily used Ojibwe art, and our colleague Sarah Butler sought out permissions and things so that we were able to use different art pieces. But I take it as an opportunity too to share with the kids that there are a lot of successful Ojibwe artists in the world, and they may have aspirations to become artists and to become storytellers and to become poets, and those are really important. Those are really important jobs within the fabric of community. And so oftentimes, unfortunately, Native youth internalize a lot of the disparaging statistics, the social, the economic, the health statistics, and think that, maybe education isn't for them, or they don't see how they can be successful. And so there's opportunities throughout the lessons to talk about different things. And of the 6 lessons, the last lesson is notably a little bit different. And we spend a bit more time going through this first lesson to illustrate all of the other lessons, but our lesson 6 talks about clans and the different responsibilities. And so basically helping youth to have some type of cultural framework to make decisions about what they might want to do in terms of pursuing a career, pursuing additional education, technical colleges, community colleges, tribal colleges, university. And so, being able to draw their attention that there are successful Ojibwe people in the world is important, and it gives them courage and hope to move forward in their life with their own aspirations. So this is this is the story, and it's difficult to read. So I think we have enough time. So I'm going to take a moment to read this first legend to you all. And I hope I do it justice. I try each time to get a little better because, you know, as a storyteller, you should be compelling and you should be engaging your audience. So long, long ago, the porcupine had no quills. One day, a porcupine was out in the woods. A bear came along and would have eaten porcupine, but he managed to get up a tree where the bear couldn't get him. The next day, porcupine was out again, and he went underneath a hawthorn tree, and he noticed how the thorns pricked him. He broke some of the branches off and put them on his back. Then he went into the woods. Along came Bear, and he jumped on Porcupine, who just curled himself up. The bear just left him alone because the thorns pricked him so much. When Abuja was watching them, he called to Porcupine and asked, "How did you think of that trick?" Porcupine told him that he was in danger when Bear was around. Then Winnebuju took some thorns and peeled the bark off them until they were all white. Then he got some clay and put it all over Porcupine's back and stuck the thorns in it. Winnebuju used his magic to make it into a proper skin and told Porcupine to come with him into the woods. When they got there, Winnebuju hid behind a tree. Wolf came along and saw Porcupine and jumped on him, but the new quills pricked at him and Wolf ran away. Bear was also afraid of the quills, and Porcupine was safe. That is why porcupines have quills. So this is a story that was adapted from a story in a book called Ojibwe Myths and Tales, Wisconsin archaeologist from 1922.
One factor, I always enjoyed looking at the dates for the legends. It was fascinating, and the language that was utilized. Yeah, really a lesson, of course, in history. One other component that was integrated in the whole venture here was the reflect and connect. So as the language was highlighted, time was built in for students to take a moment and reflect in various ways. And I mentioned the puzzles before. That was one mechanism that we found helpful just to reinforce learning and create activity. The more active we could have for the activity for the learner, the better, we found. So just to note the reflect and connect, and it's with every legend, every lesson story.
Yep, and I will say that there is an online dictionary. Some of you may or may not be familiar with it, but it's an Ojibwe English dictionary, and it's, I don't know if we have it in our resources, but we should add it. But you can do a search. It's called I think it's called the People's Dictionary for Ojibwe. And one of the really nice features is that there are a lot of elders who recorded the language. And so you're able to listen to the pronunciations. And it really helps to be able to hear the words spoken in Ojibwe, and it helps for repetition. So me and my youngest son, sometimes we'll have fun and say, "I wonder how you say this in Ojibwe," and then we'll look it up and we'll listen to it over and over, and we'll repeat repetition. So to hear it is really powerful too, and it's available to anyone, super accessible. You can even type in phrases, not just single words, but phrases. And if it's able to be translated, it's translatable there on the online dictionary.
Mm-hmm. Right. And one other part that I just didn't reflect yet would be questions. We have developed questions for small group discussions, and also that students could take home to their families. Again, reaching out and finding out about their family heritage. and helping as they learn. Okay, and I mentioned the puzzles already, but a template's there, so you could make your own puzzles and help to reinforce the Ojibwe words in the legend. So you have help.
You have help, yes. Okay, so here's legend 2, and it's Manabuju and the maple trees. And this lesson is primarily around needs and wants. And so working hard for something that you want. The students learn the difference between something that you might need and something you want, and then goal setting. So how to differentiate the two. We actually have a series of, or we have a set of activity cards, needs and wants cards that we translated into Ojibwe. So there's English on one side and Ojibwe on the other side. And kids really have a great time in small group discussions and going through and making decisions about needs and wants. And so, you know, taking kind of mainstream activities and infusing them with some culture and some language has proved to be really exciting for the students and helps them learn something even beyond just the financial capability pieces. And so, so this legend story is understanding how to live in harmony and in a good way. And so Sugar Bush is an activity that Ojibwe people still practice. So you might hear people saying they're going to go out to Sugar Bush. And what that means is there are different places within the woods that families or communities gather to tap maple trees to make maple syrup for their own consumption, as well as gifts. And sometimes families even have their own small businesses based on hunting or gathering or harvesting. So it could be wild rice. It could be gathering different types of medicines and plants, or it could be tapping maple trees. So tapping the trees for sap, boiling down the sap and canning it for use. It's really time consuming and super hard work. You have to boil about 20 gallons of sap just to get half a gallon of syrup. And so this story really illustrates the importance of working hard, the importance of cooperation, the importance of decision making, and helps kids to understand the difference between needs and wants. Because when they're having to work so hard, maybe to earn that money, they may use that money for different things than just their wants. They may really start thinking about needs. And it's always interesting with kids how literal they can get, you know. So some tables will have cards like, you know, water, food, shelter. Those are needs. And then wants, you know, you would think of kids, they would say cell phone. Of course, that's a need. No, they say that's a want, you know, or the newest clothes or whatever the case. So, you know, we have, of course, contemporary items and decisions for the kids to make, but we also practice some Ojibwe with the cards as well. And the lesson 3 is the story of the giant pike. And this has to do with good decision making. And so this story talks about a grandmother who warns her grandsons what to do and what not to do. And one decides to go his own way and do something, and it creates some hardship for the family. And so that young boy learns that when he may not listen to his elders or may not listen to wisdom and make his own decisions, sometimes those decisions can lead to difficulty for himself and for others. And so, again, this is grounded in making good decisions and helping the youth to understand that they have agency and that they are able to make their own decisions in many different regards and will continue to. And so, making poor choices is part of learning and part of growing. And Ojibwe people often allowed their youth to make maybe more decisions early on so that they could learn life's lessons and be prepared in their next season of life as a young adult or as an adult. Okay, Becky.
Okay, yes, the lesson 4 is one of interest in that I've heard just through students in classrooms share, oh yeah, my sister did this or brother. And the idea is that it's money and resource choices, spending plans. But the whole story on the 3 sisters happens to be one where there's a mother, father, 3 sisters, and a family network. And then there's arguing within the siblings. And so this is the part that often you hear students reflect, oh, that happened in my family and going forward. But the idea of quarrels and trying to come together, and it's a common story that has been in many curriculums, with the idea then of looking at gardening and how each individual might be the corn and tall plants and just the reflections of going forward. So coming together, and corn, squash, and beans, the 3 sisters on the end. So without reading the whole story, it gives the idea that each of those were the sisters who quarreled, and the parents were concerned that they may not develop resources they needed for the upcoming winter. So you'll have to read all of these legends, but this one is of immense interest that I found working with students. I'd like to note the artwork again for the different legends. They're beautiful. If you take a look at the colors and the creativity that's there. So lesson 4, the 3 sisters. Moving forward to lesson 5, this one is Winnebago and the Wolves, and it focuses on savings. And so this one, again, just amazing, the messages that are there. Very important to take a look at. If you, we go back, I believe, 1 slide.
Oh, yep.
Okay, and just to note the layout from this lesson, but you see, again, objectives, estimated time, tips, all of this carries through just to make a point for all the lessons. Thank you. So then with lesson 5, the same thing, the content is there. Again, note the artwork. And they all have reflect and connect. And again, model that you can easily adapt and utilize.
Thank you. And lesson 6, I did refer to it a little earlier, is about career exploration in the clan system. So it's about adult responsibilities. So we thought it was important for youth to hear and understand as they prepare for their adulthood that there are cultural ways to help them kind of navigate and make some decisions. So some of you may or may not be familiar with the clan system. Different tribes have different types of systems, and even different bands within our state may have some variations. But the clan system was a way for Ojibwe people to understand their roles and responsibilities within their families and within their community. It's a way to organize and to share the burden of responsibilities. And as young people begin to explore what their career interests are, if they understand what their gifts and their attributes are, it can help guide them to make some good decisions. So in this lesson, we discuss the 7 clans and their associated strengths. And it's important for students. I think so. I have 4 children, and my 2 oldest sons, they're 25 and 26 now. And I remember when they became seniors, and they were just 1 grade apart. And my oldest son felt this tremendous pressure to figure out to decide what he wanted to do with the rest of his life. And it's almost an insurmountable decision, and it can be really scary. And there is a lot of that pressure for basically they're still kids to make these really big decisions. And one thing that when I talked with him and I talked with my second son, I talked about the things that they are not only interested in, but where their strength lies, and connecting that to understanding that they do have obligations and responsibilities beyond themselves. And so I worked at a tribal college for a long time before joining Extension. I've been with Extension now. This is my 15th year. But one of the things that I learned during my time helping students and working in student services at a tribal college is when you ask an Indigenous student, a college student, why are you in college? Why are you pursuing higher education? I would say about 90%, it's not scientific, but about 90% of all students said, I want to become educated so I can help my people. And so that feeling of responsibility and obligation to not only oneself and maybe the immediate family or immediate household, but also the community is really strong within Ojibwe culture and values and beliefs. And so to help students have some type of framework to start navigating and making some decisions, we thought was really important as a way to kind of bring it all together in sort of in closing or kind of full circle, I would say. Okay. Oh, this is me. Okay. So we have another poll, and again, we're just going to use the chat. And so our question is, we have the 6 lessons listed out here. Which of these do you plan to use? And you can list 1 or more. Or if you're not sure, you can say you're not sure too. So we'll take a moment to allow you to type in the chat. Okay, let me take a peek at the chat. So we don't have anyone typing yet. Thank you, Patricia. Yes, 3 sisters. Okay. All of them. Oh, wonderful. The maple tree. I'm not sure. Okay. Yes, thank you for that. Maple tree. Okay. Yes, thank you. And once you're able to access, you go on the Z link. We'll talk about that at the end, and download the booklet and have a chance to read through all of the stories and kind of connect to whatever topic area you'll probably have a better sense then in going through. Oops. Okay. Okay, so here's an example of Becky and I becoming creative teaching even before the pandemic. So this is pre-pandemic. So this is Becky at the Fond du Lac Ojibwe School with, or maybe it was the community, it was a group at Fond du Lac. It might have been,
yes,
yeah, it might have been a youth program, but so I actually have Becky's old office. So when she retired, I moved into her office, which we thought was really appropriate. But I, at the time, lived 3 hours away in Bemidji. And so I joined larger than life, apparently, here in this picture. And my part was to read the stories to the students. And so we were coming up with, there's a lot of different creative ways that you could use. One way I thought, or this makes me think of, is if an elder would be willing to be recorded to tell the stories, because sometimes it's difficult for travel for them, but if there could be some type of recording that could be used within the classroom, that would be a really great way too, to bring in that bit of wisdom and just make the, the more teachers that you have contributing, it makes it more interesting for students, I think. So this is just one example.
Yeah, that's so true, Jennifer. And I think we did have a couple of elders early part of our work that came in. And I just remember one that shared about her own children, and she was very direct. Don't do what they did. It was with a note of humor, but she was great. So yeah, she made the message. But I wanted to share this, that we again tried to make our lessons, the content as interactive as we could. And this, we had Post-it notes and gave each student a certain number, and they had to decide if something was a need and want, what urgent, non-urgent, and we had great discussion all around, and where students actually took home to their families the result of what they did. And so they were very excited about this. So the stories, just so important. I have to tell one story that Jennifer and I went into a teacher's class, and we walked in the door and there were spitballs all over the place. You remember that, Jennifer?
I do, yes.
And we were both just kind of caught off guard, and it was just a great class, and they were busy, and it ended up, we started with the lesson, the stories, and all of a sudden you could hear a pin drop in the room. I mean, it captured their interest. They shared, I think we even missed a little piece of it, and one noted that. He said, you forgot this. And it wasn't on purpose, but probably just in context of everything. But it was so fun. And the teacher was great, and she knew her students, and she had some very active learners, but she knew some needed to be busy with their hands, and she had a project that she passed them around, and they could have busyness with their hands while they listened to the story, and then activities. And we did have puzzles. So we had, where students could move around and interact and quiz each other on the Ojibwe terms, which are identified clearly in each legend. But, and then the highlight was one said, oh, I heard this story from my grandmother, and so it was very rewarding to hear all of this. So active learning.
Rebecca and Jennifer,
Yes.
one clarification question. What age group would you recommend this for? One of the participants was thinking it was more elementary, and looks like you were using some older students for working with these.
Yes, that's a great question. We've gotten that question before, and I have found that more of the older elementary or younger middle school, it probably resonates the best with them. However, we have taught these lessons from kind of mid-elementary all the way up to high school. And so when we thought about that last lesson for the roles and responsibilities, the clan system, and kind of career exploration, we were thinking about, the older, but the sooner you can get kids to start thinking about those things, it's also really important. But it's a wide audience, again, from elementary all the way to high school. And I would even argue with some pretty simple modifications. This could be used with adults as well.
Yeah, I agree. It really, it's like on a continuum where you could adapt differently. And yeah, it's been very successful in that regard as well. And here you can see that we were always back to the drawing board. If something worked or didn't work, we re-examined. And Jennifer and I, it was always fun to connect and reflect ourselves on how things went and any changes that could be made.
All right, so we are at the end of our presentation and we do have some time left. So we would like to take a few minutes to do questions, but we also have some questions for you all as well, because as Becky said, we're always learning, and we're always listening and taking what we hear from practitioners and teachers and folks in the communities and trying to incorporate and strengthen the work that we're doing. And so so our question is, how can you weave culture into your classes? And we can take a minute to allow you to think, a couple of minutes, type in the chat. How can you weave culture into your classes? Oh, this is great, Glennies. So as you're still thinking, and it's okay if you just want to think and just, you know, have your time for reflection. But you know, weaving culture into our lessons really helps for our shared understandings and knowledge, and it helps to build our relationships and trust with one another, because that's really what education is about, is building relationships and building trust. Only when people know that you're authentic and you're even youth, especially when you're there to listen to them and to help them in the ways that they want to be helped and try to understand them in the ways that they want to be understood, then the content pieces follow. Then the action steps can be put into place, and that's when you know, change occurs, when education informs decisions and people start changing and making different decisions based on that.
But that's so true about the importance of trust in relationships. And one other story, Jennifer, remember they changed our room in the school, and some of the students were worried that we'd be lost and not find our way. And so they actually came to find us. And these were some of the ones that were very active in our class. And so it just was wonderful. I mean, we built that relationship, and through storytelling, I think we came to a common ground and respect for one another. It was a wonderful experience.
Yeah, and we have, let's see. Don't know if we'll be able, okay, so Glennies, let's see.
Maybe
Okay.
I need to explain my position there a
Yeah.
little bit more.
Sure.
By the way, I had the position 15 years ago in a different connotation in Northwest Minnesota, but Jennifer moved into my office in Crookston when I retired 15 years ago, or whatever it was, 16 years ago. So there's a connection. But I'm retired obviously for a long time, but I continue to work with our learning circle groups. And in my case, that's lots of old white women, most of them
Mhm.
grandmothers. But
Mhm.
storytelling, just use the concept of storytelling and sharing tradition. And a lot of these women were on the tail end of the Depression and going through husbands off to war and different things of that nature, and
Mhm.
how they made money stretch or decisions that had to be made. I think it incorporate the same idea of sharing culture, and without maybe preaching to their grandchildren that they're spending their money badly or whatever, to the whole concept of storytelling would be good in a modified form.
Mhm. Thank you for sharing that, Glenise. I completely agree. I think that, especially for youth, we know that they don't necessarily like to be told what to do, right? So by sharing stories and imparting that wisdom through kind of a gentle but corrective means can be really helpful. And because ultimately we want um, youth or the learners to think about things in a different way, and also to create their own agency that, they can make these decisions for themselves. And so, how are they going to take this new information or new understandings and make those decisions as they move forward? Thank you for sharing. And I see there's, I don't know if we'll be able to get to all of these in the chat. We so appreciate. Um, let's see. So Patricia, today in advisory. Okay, today in advisory, I asked my students what traditions they have in their families that they really like, and then what traditions might you have? Yeah, so engaging with what students are learning from home and the stories that they're hearing. I think um, even beyond Ojibwe culture, but just kind of the culture of Minnesota and the cold during winter and around the holidays and those kinds of things when families gather. I think there is a lot of playing games, telling stories, recalling previous generations and the things that they've experienced. So I think winter storytelling is an important time to learn from one another.
Right, and if you think of weaving, of all that's a part of a woven piece of fabric, that we're stronger together and can learn from one another. And I guess whatever means, and legends certainly could be a tool that may be of interest and helping one to achieve that goal.
Thank you. So we have some resources. At this Z link, you are able to access the lessons, the booklet, and print them. We did do a printing and sent out a lot of copies kind of early on when we first printed a couple of years ago, and we're hoping to do a second printing. And so if anyone would like a hard copy, you could send your name to either me or Beck. Well, probably me, since I'm closer. I'm working with a printing shop that the university uses, but we would be more than happy to send you a booklet. Otherwise, I'm not sure when that's going to happen though, so you may just want to go online and just print one for yourself. And then we did list the cultural webinar. So Becky and Antonio and I, like I said, worked together for a long time to do a lot of different, we developed a lot of different educational resources and tools and things around culture and money, basically. And so all of that, there's a lot of information. If you go to University of Minnesota Extension and Center for Family Development, you're able to access and see a lot of different resources that family development has. So with that, we are at time, and here is our contact information. And again, please reach out to Becky or myself if you have any questions. And Becky, I don't know.
Thank you. Thank you all very much for joining us today. And it would be very exciting to hear if you try some of the lessons and your comments, your thoughts about that. So thank you.
And if anybody needs a certificate of participation to document professional development, complete the evaluation. That link was in the chat, and I believe you'll be directed to that when you leave. We will also send a follow-up email with a PDF of the PowerPoint and links to many of the resources mentioned. And so to get that certificate, complete the evaluation, and you'll be able to get it that way as well. Thank you.